Vanakkam, Namaste, and blessings to everyone. This is Dr. Bhairavi Balasubramaniam, the Sky Priestess. Today's video is a reflection on a very, very sensitive subject in the United States, well, all over the world, but especially in the US right now. And that is the question of race and its intersection with spiritual practice. Now, obviously, one video is not going to cover everything. That would be a fool's errand. But what I can say and what I can share is that I see a definitive difference in the lands in the US that were ceded and those that were unceded. Now, for those of you who don't know the distinction between it, it's one that's well worth looking up. Unceded land is basically land that was not formally given over to the US by virtue of some treaty or some other type of agreement. And so land which is taken and not given has a very, very different vibrational signature than land that has been grudgingly or, with open-hearted acceptance allowed to be settled and colonized by people who are not of the indigenous stock, so to speak. And that's a huge topic. I know that in Canada, in certain public ceremonies and functions, and I learned this from a friend whom I met in New Mexico attending a workshop, she said that in Canada, the rulings have changed. People are taking a different view on the question of indigenous land and territory. And what they're doing is they're beginning to say, before any public event in certain locations, we here stand on unceded land or on stolen land, in other words. Now, it's not a new concept to me because I started my education in the United States, actually. And I actually came into this country years ago wanting to study physics. I met an inspired professor who taught me about African political history and Native American history to a certain extent, and North American history, everything. And I learned all of it, and I felt that it was inherently wrong. The way the subject was discussed, the way the subject was presented, and the way the students were responding to all of it. I remember very, very vividly, I was 16 at the time, I started university very early, and I remember very vividly the professor asking us, how many of you believe that the indigenous should have their lands returned to them, or, be compensated in some way? And instantly, my hand shot up, as did one other student who was a liberal arts major. She was a senior, and another international student. And the rest of the class just said, no, they don't deserve anything. That was one of the I took one look at that and I went, and this was a university in Indiana. I basically said, no, this is not my place. And it was that instinct that led me to other countries where I studied in parts of Europe and so on and so forth. And I switched my major from physics to political science for that reason. It made a great impression upon me. And years later, when I come back here, half a Saturn cycle later, if you must know, I see that the attitudes aren't that different, though there is more awareness. When it comes to spiritual practice, what I have found is not acknowledging the land is a very, very bad idea. When we try to work with land, and we have to start working with land before we do anything else, we need to acknowledge the history that has gone and taken place on that land, whether it's a major geological change, or whether it's a war, or whether it's a massacre, or whether it is simply historical continuity and, different people coming together and changes occurring over time. Without honoring the history of a land and the people on that land, we actually shoot ourselves in the foot when we try to heal anybody else, including ourselves. I found this in Australia, I find this in India, I find this anywhere I go and do work with people. It is, in other words, imperative to acknowledge where you are standing and what that land has endured. I would also suggest to all those of you who do healing, who hold workshops, who facilitate, to try and get the blessings of the indigenous in whatever locale you are. And I know sometimes that's very difficult because they may be hard to find, and in different parts of the world, people are losing their culture. They are disconnecting from their spiritual traditions because they don't believe in it, or, they think that it doesn't work. But even if it is as much as a wish, a heartfelt wish set out to that land, to that territory, I would say this is where one needs to begin any type of healing work. The reason for this is that when we actually try to work with land that has not been acknowledged, we replay the same drama and replay the same patterns of victimization and traumatization in the people whom we work on. And that was why so much of my workshops, especially in Australia, had to begin with that acknowledgement. The same thing with my workshop in Arizona. We spent, we needed to understand that this place had its own essence, had its own spirit, had its own being before doing anything. And whilst it's very commonsensical, I would say a lot of people don't think about this. Now, a lot of people in the spiritual healing industry are of Caucasian descent. And it is not to say that white people don't have any problems or only brown people should heal or whatever. It's got nothing to do with that. It is about really learning to acknowledge what is some of the history and some of the trauma, whether you're victim or abuser, it all carries through, that you carry in your own bloodline, and that, if you want to call it, the DNA of the land equally remembers. Doing that critical work of acknowledgement through a simple ceremony, through a simple statement at the start of any healing work you do, whether it's a trauma workshop, whether it's channeling from the cosmos, whatever it is, even if it's a yoga class, start with honoring the ancestry of the place that you are standing on and its heritage. And that will actually make your experiences of what you are doing that much more authentic, that much more intense. And you won't have to keep replaying, dealing with the same trauma, drama dynamic that is playing out in the participants that you see. And so this has been one of the reasons why my California workshop has been kind of in the air for me, because, and it hit me as I was talking to a friend today, I needed to speak to someone who actually had that connection with the land. That is not to say that white people do not have connections to the land. That is ridiculous. It is to say that getting an indigenous perspective is pretty critical. It is how you stay real and rooted and grounded. And like I said, even if you can't find someone directly, speak. Speak to the cosmos. Speak to the universe. Ask for that permission, or ask to be shown whether this is something you need to do. Just because you can heal, just because you can facilitate, does not mean that you should do it anyway, anywhere you see fit. And this is something that needs to be addressed in a sensitive manner as more and more facilitators take their work all over the world. Now, even when you are using a tradition that comes from a different culture, that comes from a different land, even if it's something that's widely prevalent in a different country, let's say yoga in the US, remember to honor its roots. Remember to look at the culture that that practice came from, because that's when you're doing that practice. Not some version of it that's been adapted to where you are. I mean, maybe some of you might like this message, maybe some of you might not, but that is the way I do my practice, and you guys are here hearing what I have to say because you're interested in what I'm doing. So, something to take on board. I would say, and at the very least, coming back to the US after my initial encounters and experiences, the same fault lines are at work. What we see is happening on the surface, whether it's politics, whether it's social or cultural change, all of these occur along the same fault lines, whether it's geological or political or cultural fault lines that are embedded into the landscape of this country and of any country on the planet. But I'm speaking about the US because that's where I am right now. And, I value the fact that I had that experience so that I could actually kind of draw a line of continuity from back then till now to see how much I have changed and to see how much my perception of the situation has changed and what remains the same. But, I think that about sums it up. Check to see, those of you who are sincerely working on land, check to see the history of where you live. Check to see what layers of practices, of cultures, of people have come and gone. And even developing this within yourself already brings you that much closer to having an authentic and fulfilling experience with whatever you're doing. So take care. Ciao, ciao. God and Goddess bless. Bye-bye for now.